Hello, good day, dear students. This is a lesson on the topic of morphology, which is part of your paper on language and linguistics. It might sound like something very complicated, but actually it's not. So, this is going to be a very short lecture on morphology. Now, you are familiar with phonetics and phonology, which are the study of speech sounds, also called phonemes. Just like that, morphology is the study of something called morphemes. And morphemes are the basic units of meaning in a language. Now, we all know, you can see here a pyramid which is about the different levels of grammatical analysis. In grammar, we usually look at sentences. Now, sentences are basically combinations of words. You will learn more about sentences later, but sentences can be further broken down into clauses, phrases, and words. So one might think that the word is the basic unit of grammatical analysis, but there is something even smaller than a word, and that is the morpheme. So the basic unit of grammatical analysis is considered to be the morpheme, and morphology is the field of linguistics which is dedicated to the study of morphemes. As I already mentioned, morphemes are the smallest meaningful unit in a language. It can also be called the smallest unit of grammatical function. So these are two different ways in which the morpheme can be defined. Morpheme is both the smallest unit of a language which has meaning on its own. So word has meaning, but suppose you can split that word into further meaningful units, those are called morphemes. And morphology is the systematic study of how morphemes combine together to form words. Now let us look at some examples of morphemes. Look at these three examples. In the first one, we have a word unassailable. It is a single word, unassailable. If you split it into morphemes, you can see that there are three morphemes: un plus assail plus able. So the word unassailable has meaning on its own, but you can split it further into smaller meaningful units. Un, negative meaning. Assail, it is a verb which has meaning on its own, meaning something like attack. And able also has meaning. So you have split the larger word unassailable into three morphemes: un, assail, and able. Now you cannot say that these three are words. Assail can be a word, able can be a word in some context, but un is not a word. So un, assail, and able are all morphemes. Now look at the next example. Knowingly. Knowingly can be split into know plus ing plus li. Know. Know is a full word. It has meaning on its own, to know something. When you add ing, you are adding a grammatical function to it. Ing actually has meaning, and its meaning is the same as its grammatical function. You add ing to any verb and you are making it continuous. So knowing, knowing. Knowing plus ly, knowingly. Knowingly becomes a, when you add ly to many words, not all words, but when you add ly to many words, that is how you form adverbs. He looked knowingly. He smiled knowingly. So knowingly here becomes an adverb. In this context, when you add ly, the grammatical function is to make that word into an adverb. Now look at the last word, boys. This is interesting. It's a very small word, and sometimes you might think it cannot be split any further, but it can actually be split into two: boy plus S. Boy, boy. Boy is a boy. And what is this S doing? S by itself doesn't have any specific meaning, but in this context, when you add S to the end of a noun, you are making it plural. So, S here performs the grammatical function of adding the meaning plural. These are three examples of words that can be split into their constituent morphemes. Now that we have already defined the morpheme as the smallest meaningful unit or the smallest unit of grammatical function, let us look at some criteria that are needed to consider something as a morpheme. Every unit of language, every time a word is split into two, it need not become a morpheme. So there are three criteria in order to understand whether a unit of language is a morpheme or not. Only if it in the earlier example, we saw the word no. No is a word by itself. It has meaning. It can be considered a morpheme. Or a part of a word. All those little bits like un, ly, s, these are not words by themselves. They are parts of a word, but they have their own meaning or their own grammatical function. Second criterion. A morpheme cannot be divided into smaller meaningful parts without violation of its meaning or without meaningless remainders. This means that you can divide a word into its constituent morphemes. But if you take a morpheme and then you divide it, then you don't get other morphemes. Then what you do is you get parts which are meaningless in themselves or which have a violated meaning. Violated meaning means that the meaning of that part has nothing to do with the meaning of the morpheme itself. In the next slide, I will give you some examples of this. But so this is what it means when you say that a morpheme cannot be divided into smaller meaningful parts without violating its meaning or without leaving meaningless remainders. Remainder, that which remains. So when you break something, when you break a morpheme, you might get one part which looks like a meaningful unit, but then if the rest of it is just a meaningful remainder, then that is not correct. If you are able to have two meaningful remainders, then those two are morphemes, and the larger unit that they combine to cannot be called a morpheme, it is actually a word. But ഒരു വേർഡ് ആണെങ്കിൽ അതിനെ മോർഫീംസ് ആയിട്ട് സ്പ്ലിറ്റ് ചെയ്യാൻ പറ്റും. ഒരു മോർഫീം ആണെങ്കിൽ അതിനെ അതിലും ചെറിയ യൂണിറ്റ്സ് ആയിട്ട് സ്പ്ലിറ്റ് ചെയ്യാൻ പറ്റില്ല. അറ്റ്ലീസ്റ്റ് അതിലും ചെറിയ മീനിങ് യൂണിറ്റ്സ് ആയിട്ട് നമുക്ക് സ്പ്ലിറ്റ് ചെയ്യാൻ പറ്റില്ല. അങ്ങനെ സ്പ്ലിറ്റ് ചെയ്താൽ ഒന്നെങ്കിൽ ആ വേർഡ്സ് ആ യൂണിറ്റ്സിന് മീനിങ് ഉണ്ടാവില്ല, അല്ലെങ്കിൽ അതിൽ ഒരു കഷ്ണത്തിന് മീനിങ് ഉണ്ടെങ്കിൽ മറ്റൊരു ഭാഗത്തിന് മീനിങ് ഇല്ലാത്ത റിമൈൻഡർ ആയിട്ട് അവിടെ കിടക്കുന്നുണ്ടാവും. അപ്പോൾ ഏറ്റവും സ്മോളസ്റ്റ് മീനിങ് ഫുൾ യൂണിറ്റ് ആണെങ്കിൽ മാത്രമാണ് നമുക്കതിനെ morpheme എന്ന് പറയാൻ പറ്റുള്ളൂ. And the third criterion, it recurs in differing verbal environments with a relatively stable meaning. It can recur, it can occur again and again. It can repeat in differing verbal environments. That means it doesn't always come in the same place. It can be used along with many other combinations, but each time it will have a relatively stable meaning. Now, this will become easier if you think of a word, of a morpheme like un, un. So, un, when you add it to the beginning of a word, you are changing the meaning of that word into its negative. You are giving the opposite meaning. And this is the meaning or the grammatical function of the morpheme un. So, it can be unknown, or unable or unnecessary, In all these are different verbal environments. That means you are combining un with different words. But in all these contexts, the meaning of the morpheme un is the same, or the grammatical function of the morpheme un is more or less the same. It is more or less stable. It is relatively stable. In all these contexts, un will make that word negative. Now let us look at some examples. First one, this is very simple. We have a larger word, unlikable, that can be divided into three morphemes: un plus like plus able. Unlikable. Each of these un, like, and able are independent units that either have meaning on their own or add meaning to the word. So, like is a word by itself, it has meaning on its own. Able also has meaning on its own. And un, as I mentioned earlier, when it is added to the word likable, it gives it a negative meaning. So each of these parts either has meaning on its own or adds a particular meaning to when you combine it with the others. So these are all examples of morphemes. Now let us look at a counter example. So these are examples of what are morphemes, how we can split a word into its constituent morphemes. And now we will look at the very opposite, a counter example of when splitting a word does not give you morphemes. Let us look at the word carpet. Now carpet might sound like there are two morphemes in it, car and pet. But car, yes, it is an independent word, it is a meaningful word on its own, but it has nothing to do with a carpet. Just like pet, it also has meaning on its own. It can stand by itself. But pet has nothing to do with carpet. കാറും പെറ്റും കൂടി കമ്പൈൻ ചെയ്തുണ്ടാവുന്നതല്ല കാർപ്പറ്റ്. Carpet is a different thing altogether. So carpet is a single morpheme. So here you can also see that sometimes you tend to think that if there are two syllables in a word, there are two morphemes, but that is not true. Syllables are completely different from morphemes. Now, we said that words can be split into morphemes, or morphemes combined together to form words. And this process of dividing words into their constituent morphemes is called segmentation. So what we did just now, taking a word like unlikable and dividing it into three morphemes, that is called segmentation. And each of these segments are called morphs. Now this is interesting. There is a slight difference between a morph and a morpheme. As I said, a morpheme is a unit of meaning or grammatical function. That means it is conceptual. It is at the level of thinking. It is not the words u and n coming together. U, n, and that is not a morpheme. Instead, the negative meaning that is brought by the letters u, n, that is a morpheme. Similarly, the letter s, when it is added at the end of a noun, the s is not a morpheme. Rather, what does it add? It adds a plural meaning. Boy, boys, right? So that s is actually representing the plural morpheme. So morphemes are conceptual. Morphemes are at the level of meaning. And the letters or the combinations of letters that we use to represent a particular morpheme are called morphs. The word morph actually means shape. So the letters on the page that we use are called morphs, and each morph is a shape that represents a particular morpheme. So you can look at these two examples I have given. Boys is a word. It can be split up into two morphemes, boy plus s. But it is not actually boy plus s. It is boy plus plural morpheme. And secondly, we have the past tense word played. That is play plus ed. But it is not actually play plus ed. It is play plus the past tense morpheme. Ed is something that adds the past tense form to the verb play. And when you can see that I have used braces here. There are a particular kind of brackets. They're not the usual brackets, not the round brackets or the square brackets. These are called braces. And Just like when you write the phonemes in phonetics, you put them within two slash marks, right? Two obliques. Like that, when you write a morpheme, usually you represent it inside these kind of special kind of brackets called braces. Now, we already mentioned these two, plural morpheme and past tense morpheme. That brings us to another concept which is very relevant while studying morphemes, and that is the concept of allomorphs. You are familiar with allophones in phonetics. Similarly, in morphology, we have something called allomorphs. And what is an allomorph? Sometimes a particular morpheme might be represented not by the same morphs but by different morphs in varying environments. Such different representations of a morpheme are called allomorphs of that morpheme. Now, this is actually not as difficult as it sounds. I've given some very simple examples here. Now, let us look at the plural morpheme. In the word boys, the plural morpheme, it is actually boys is a combination of boy plus plural morpheme, but that is represented by boy plus s. So the morpheme is a plural morpheme, and the morph or the shape that represents this plural morpheme is the letter s. But if you look at men, the word men, that is also a plural term. That is actually man plus plural morpheme. But here, instead of adding man plus s, mans എന്നല്ല വരുന്നത്. Instead, when you add man plus plural morpheme, we have the word itself changes and becomes men. So these are two examples where you have the same morpheme, the plural morpheme. രണ്ടിലും ഒരേ മോർഫീമാണ്, പ്ലൂറൽ മോർഫീമാണ് ആഡ് ചെയ്യുന്നത്. ബോയിൻ്റെ കൂടെ നമ്മൾ ആഡ് ചെയ്യുന്നത് പ്ലൂറൽ മോർഫീമാണ്, മാനിൻ്റെ കൂടെ ആഡ് ചെയ്യുന്നതും പ്ലൂറൽ മോർഫീമാണ്. പക്ഷെ റെപ്രസെൻറ്റ് ചെയ്യുന്നത് വളരെ ഡിഫറെൻ്റ് ആയിട്ടാണ്. ഇൻ ദ ഫസ്റ്റ് കേസ് ഒരു പ്ലസ് എസ് എന്നുള്ള ആ ഒരു ലെറ്റർ അവസാനം ആഡ് ചെയ്യുന്നതാണ്, ദാറ്റ് ഇസ് ദ മോർഫ്. In the second case, you don't add anything, you change one letter. M-A-N becomes M-E-N. That is also an addition of a plural morpheme. So here we can see that in boys and in men, we can see allomorphs of the same morpheme, which is a plural morpheme. Similarly, let us look at these two examples, played and went. Played is a past tense verb. It is formed by combining the verb play with the past tense morpheme. And it is represented as play plus ed, but actually it is play plus past tense morpheme. Similarly, if you look at went, it is go plus past tense morpheme. But here, the past tense morpheme is not represented by ed, it's not good. Played pole good nalla ezhudha nammal. It's a different representation. So in played and in went, what you add to the verb is the same morpheme, that is a past tense morpheme. ഒരേ മോർഫീമാണ്, പക്ഷെ അതിൻ്റെ representation, the shapes that you use to represent the past tense morpheme are completely different in either case. So played and went, in both played and went, we can see that they are allomorphs of the same morpheme, which is the past tense morpheme. Now, to sum up the main points that I have tried to make in this video, first of all, morphemes are the smallest meaningful units in a language. They can also be called the smallest units of grammatical function. And the study of these morphemes is called morphology. Morphology is a branch of linguistics dealing with the study of morphemes. And morphemes, as I mentioned, are at the level of meaning, they are conceptual, and if you want to write them down, if you want to represent them, then you have to use certain shapes called morphs. The letters or combinations of letters that you use to represent a morpheme are called morphs. And morphs can be a word or a segment of a word or even just one letter, like the plural morpheme being represented by the letter S. And when the same morpheme is represented by different morphs, they are called allomorphs of that morpheme. And we have given the example of plural morpheme and past tense morpheme in this context. They are both we can see that plural morpheme has several allomorphs and past tense morpheme also has several allomorphs. So these are some of the first important points about morphology. I will come up with one more video about morphology, but these are the most basic things that you need to know. Thank you.